What is the crack, everyone? It's Nathan here, aka the Rambling Kern, and head instructor of Kern School of Combat. So, I wanted to continue on my series looking at traditional clothing of Irish women. So today I'm going to focus on the headwear of the Renaissance. This is something that's quite unique in Ireland. There is very much a resistance in Ireland at the time to adopt new headwear and new styles coming in. This can be seen both in men and in women. And interestingly, we see a very diverse yet traditional style of headwear being worn by both. And there's some really fascinating pieces that I'm going to show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap over to show you the images in a little bit more detail so that I can discuss them, and I do hope you enjoy.
So first off is the cheese mould hat. So this hat is basically one that consisted of strips of white linen wrapped around the head, and this is generally how it's referred to in 16th and early 17th century literature, and it appears to be generally characteristic of a hat for noble and upper class Irish women. So something that's kind of interesting, especially about headwear, is that often there is very much a social status attached to the hats, and there is very specific types of hats for this. Basically, a way to think about it would be similar to the sort of hats that you might expect to see at race days, such as horse racing events, that you would see today. This would be very common during the 16th and 17th century to see Irish women of certain social classes wearing particular styles of hats. So often you will see the cheese mould hat, as it's referred to, worn as you see here with a cap on top. So the lady in the blue dress is the one where on the far left is actually the one you'll see wearing the cheese mould cap. So this is quite an interesting bit of headwear, mainly due to a lot of the kind of social status that goes with it. So this initial image is from Lucas de Hare's work in 1570. And the woman does appear to be a noble. She's wearing a cheese mould hat with a short veil. And like I said, these hats definitely had a certain level of noble status attached to them. As you can see here in the second image of the lady wearing the very similar style of hat with the cheese mould hat with the cap worn atop. This picture is from Lucas de Hare's later work, and you can see that this lady is quite well adorned. She's wearing quite rich clothing as opposed to the man on the left. Now if we take a look at another picture that's ever so slightly later but very famous from John Derrick's work, you'll see the lady that I've highlighted here. So this picture is from 1581, and you'll see that this lady is very much center of the table next to a lord, so most likely high status, and again something that we start to see quite commonly with this hat, especially when it's depicted. So there's a few interesting references from English writers of the time. So one from William Good from 1527, between 1527 I should say and 1568, is that they load their heads rather than adorn them with several ells of fine linen rolled up in wreaths, as they do their necks with necklaces and their arms with bracelets. So this is quite an interesting thing in my mind as to how popular wearing large amounts of linen was in Ireland at the time. I mean, this is something that you'll see with the Leona, which I've done a previous video on, and it is something that you definitely do see throughout Irish clothing of the time. It's very much a clear way to donate wealth, especially with the subsequent bans that was put on wearing specific amounts and styles of clothing. You do see very much an upswing in wearing large amounts of cloth. Another one here from Finns Morrison from somewhere around 1600. And their heads be covered after the Turkish manner, with many ells of linen. Only Turkish heads or tulbents are round at the top, but the attire of the Irish women's heads is more flat on the top and broader on the sides, not much unlike a cheese mott if it had a hole to put in the head. An example of the Turkish headwear described by Morrison is evident in a drawing by Albert Dürer, should you wish to go look it up. Another reference from the same individual, he says that the great linen roll which the women wear to keep their heads warm after cutting their hair, which they use in any sickness. So similar styles of headwear were seen across Europe. You do see a few examples. However, it was one that really does seem to be quite popular in Ireland at the time. So next up we have what's often referred to as the onion hat. This one I find very interesting myself, as you can see from the lady here on the left. This is the onion style hat. But if you look at the gentleman in the middle of the picture, you'll see he's wearing a helmet made in a very similar fashion. Now, unfortunately, there's no surviving examples of these helmets, but I do think it's a very interesting contrast to see essentially a fashion item representing a military item. And it is something that makes me wonder quite a bit about different styles of Irish clothing and if there were crossovers between the two. This one has generally just been dubbed the onion hat due to its appearance. There isn't a particular reason for that other than its appearance. However, it does appear in the pictures that we have of this hat that there is a metal element to it, possibly with cloth worn in between. So this initial picture, the one that you're seeing now, is from Lucas Daher's work from 1575. The second piece, you'll see a little bit more detail, slightly bigger picture, and this one is from, now I'm probably going to butcher this pronunciation, but it's the Costume der Männer und Frauen in Augsburg and Nuremberg in Deutschland. So very interesting to see the picture and the hat in a little bit more detail. And one thing again that you do see is the prevalence of quite a lot of cloth under the helmet or hat itself, which I find quite interesting and mirrored in a lot of other pieces as well. So next up we have what's often referred to as the beaver hat. So this hat's generally depicted on civil Irish women, in other words, well-to-do women, but not necessarily nobility. There is an interesting description of this that we get from Luke Gernon, roughly around 1620, and it says that at Kilkenny they wear broad beaver hats coloured, edged with gold lace and faced with velvet with broad gold hat band. Quite an interesting, quite a striking style of hat. An interesting one that appears in a few different styles and a few different pictures, and quite a striking look. So next up we have the cap, and this is something that we do see appear quite a bit both in artwork in various different references, and these three examples which appear thankfully as many other clothing items throughout Irish history in various different bogs. So these are all felt hats that were found perfectly preserved, all made of felt, as I say. You have some brimmed hats, and as well as a traditional style of bonnet that was also found, which you'll see now in a second. So these hats were found in Donegal, Mayo, Sligo, and the bonnet, which was found in Kerry, all dating from the 16th to 17th century. And these would have been quite common and worn across various different social standings, and obviously of various different types of quality as well. So an interesting item of headwear that we see appear in effigies but not necessarily in artwork is various different types of veils. So this type, often referred to as the clamshell veil, appears in three different effigies. So these ones that you see, the first one is a carving of Mother Mary, the second is a 16th century carving from Tara, and the third is from St. Canice's in Kilkenny. Quite an interesting style of headwear, and one that we do see appear quite often. So the next veil that we have is what's sometimes referred to as the wimple. This image here is of a woman wearing a long wimple-like veil. This one is from Old Kilcullen in from the monument, I should say, in Old Kilcullen in the county of Kildare. Very interesting type of headwear, one that you do see across Europe at the time, and it does actually appear in a few different other images as well. So next up in this depiction we have what's sometimes referred to as a turban, essentially the Irish turban. There is a reference from Don Francisco Quiller in 1588, basically saying that it comprises of linen cloth much doubled over the head and tied in front, as you can see in this image here. This image also actually comes from the same monument in Kildare. So very interesting to see two sets of similar yet very different items of headwear. Now the final veil is the napkin. So this one is an interesting short veil, very similar to earlier kerchiefs or headscarves that you would have seen across Ireland and Europe at the time. There's various different ones that kind of mirror this. This image itself is a lady wearing one. It comes from the middle of the 17th century, and it is quite an interesting picture. Very nicely detailed brat that the lady's wearing as well. The brat was very common between both men and women at the time. Of course, there will be a video, very in-depth video coming in the future on that as well. And finally, the last item I headwear to cover is hair worn loose. So there is an interesting reference to this that comes from Luke Gernon's Discourse of Ireland from 1620, and the quote reads as such: "The maids wear on the forepart of their head about 4 yards of coloured ribbon smoothly laid, and their own hair plaited behind. In other places they wear their hair loose and cast behind. At Waterford they wear caps turned with fur and laced with gold lace. In Thomond they wear kerchiefs hanging down in the middle of their backs." And this image here may very well depict something similar to what is described. This one is of course taken from Lucas de Hare's work. This image is of an Irish woman and girl, so a very interesting image, and of course really goes against the usual Hollywood trope of very dark and grim clothing. So really interesting items of clothing. I would also really like to thank the team of Saffron Cloth, whose link I have left in the description. They've done some amazing research on this topic, and I really commend them for what they've done. So you will find the links to their work in the description of the video.
Well, that was a kind of a summary of the headwear worn by women during the late medieval and Renaissance period. So I do hope you enjoyed that. This is kind of like I say, a bit of a summary. It's basically a collection of what I could find and kind of references and images kind of compiled together. If there are any other ones that you know of, please do send on. I would love to see them. I do find the subject very fascinating, and I will be doing more videos in the coming weeks on Irish martial arts and weaponry, because I know those are very popular, but I do feel that traditional Irish clothing is something that's very underappreciated and very underrepresented, and also very misunderstood. So it's something that I did want to go into a little bit more detail and just kind of show you guys, and hopefully get a bit of enjoyment out of it. Now the channel itself is closing in on that 1,000 mark. I think as of the release of this video, we're hovering at around 950 subscribers. So if you can help close in on that 1,000 by the end of the month, I would be absolutely delighted. As ever, thank you very much for your support. Thank you for watching, and I do hope you enjoyed the video. Slán.